I found my husband's second lease. The tenant was 7 months pregnant. There are 3 types of lies a person can tell you. The first kind is the lie of commission, the flat-out fabrication, the thing said with a straight face that has no basis in reality. The second kind is the lie of omission, the convenient silence, the story with the third act removed. And the third kind, the one nobody warns you about in any self-help book or therapy session or late-night conversation with your most cynical friend, is the lie of architecture. The kind where someone doesn't just tell you something false. They build it. They pour the foundation, frame the walls, wire the electricity, and hang curtains in the windows. They give it a street address. They pay the utilities on time. And they commute between that structure and the life you think you share, every single week, for years, and you never, not once, hear them come in the back door. I found my husband's second lease on a Tuesday in March, at approximately 11:15 in the morning, while I was doing our taxes. I want you to sit with the mundanity of that for a second. Not a dramatic confrontation, not a lipstick on a collar, not a mysterious phone call I happen to overhear. Our taxes, a spreadsheet, a QuickBooks export sorted by date, vendor, and amount, the way I do every year for every one of my clients and have done for our household since Owen and I got married 6 years ago. I am a CPA. Numbers are my primary language. I speak fluent spreadsheet. And in all the years I've been doing this, reconciling statements, chasing receipts, finding the one transposed digit that explains a $2,000 discrepancy, I never once expected the thing I'd find would be a whole other woman. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to the Tuesday. Act 1. The number that didn't add up. The office I work from is technically a converted sunroom at the back of the house Owen and I bought in 2020. It looks out onto a yard that is mostly dead grass and one aggressively optimistic dogwood tree that blooms every April regardless of what's happening in the world around it. I find this tree either comforting or annoying depending on the day. That Tuesday in March, with 6 inches of tax season still ahead of me and a mug of coffee going cold at my elbow, I found it annoying. I didn't want resilience from the landscaping. I wanted quiet. Owen had already left for work. He's in commercial real estate. Development, specifically. The kind of work that requires a lot of driving around, looking at parcels of land and muttering things like permitting timeline and zoning variants under his breath. He leaves early, comes home late, travels a few days a month to oversee projects in Charlottesville and Roanoke, and occasionally as far as D.C. This is all very normal for what he does. I knew it when I married him. I adjusted. I was working through our joint account when I hit a line item that snagged something in my brain the way a loose thread snags on a splinter. The vendor was listed as Birchwood Property Management, LLC. The amount was $1,450. The date was the 1st of the previous month. I scrolled back. There it was again. 1st of the month before that, and before that, and I opened the full year. Every 1st of the month for the past 11 months, with one exception in August when it had hit on the 3rd, which is what you'd expect if the 1st fell on a weekend and the automated transfer pushed. $1,200 roughly per year. No, wait, I did the math again. $1,450 times 12, $17,400 a year. That is not a number a person forgets to mention. I sat back in my chair. The dogwood tree continued its project of not caring about my problems. I picked up my coffee mug, put it down without drinking. There is a specific sensation I get in the back of my skull when a number doesn't fit its context. A kind of low-grade alertness, like the professional equivalent of a dog's ears going up. I've had it during audits. I've had it when a client's claimed deductions didn't match their industry average. I had it very strongly now. The obvious interpretations ran through my mind quickly, the way they do when you're trying to be fair before you're catastrophic. Owen owns commercial real estate. He develops it, yes, but he also holds some properties himself as investments. Was this a management fee on a rental property? I pulled his business accounts. There was no corresponding rent income that would explain it. A storage unit? Too expensive. A parking space? Much too expensive. Could it be a deduction I'd missed categorizing? I typed Birchwood Property Management Richmond 5A into the search bar. Their website was exactly what you'd expect from a small property management company. Generic stock photography of smiling families. A map centered on the Richmond metro area. A contact page with an address in the Fan District. They managed residential properties exclusively, single-family homes and apartments. Their specialty, according to the About page, was what they called seamless tenant placement and long-term lease management, which is property manager language for we find tenants and then stay out of the way. Owen had a property with them that he had never mentioned to me. I should tell you something about Owen and me before I go further, because it matters for understanding how I reacted, or rather, how I didn't. Owen Moreau is not a cold man. He is not cruel or dismissive or the kind of husband who makes you feel small. He is, in the ways that count on the surface, a genuinely good partner. He cooks on weekends. He remembers that I hate cilantro with a passion bordering on personal offense. He asks about my clients by name. He calls his mother every Sunday without being reminded. In 6 years of marriage, we have had maybe 4 fights that I would classify as serious, and all 4 were resolved with the kind of honest conversation that couples therapists apparently charge significant money to facilitate. What Owen is, I would understand later, is a world-class architect of omission. He never lies to your face. He just never builds you a complete picture. So my first response to finding the Birchwood payment was not panic. It was something quieter and more specific. A curiosity that I was already, without consciously deciding to, trying to suppress. Because Owen handled his business finances separately. Because he'd sometimes said the details of real estate investing were boring. Because in a functional marriage, you extend good faith the way you extend credit, with some reasonable assumption that it won't be abused. I wrote Birchwood on a sticky note. I put it next to my keyboard. I went back to the taxes, but the number didn't leave me alone. By Thursday, I had Birchwood's address from the county assessor's website. By Saturday, which was 5 days after I found the payment, and 2 days before I would confront Owen about it, a confrontation that would, I now understand, produce a masterclass in controlled information management. I was parked on a side street in the museum district, looking at a 3-story apartment building with a brick facade and a row of matching mailboxes visible through the lobby glass. I want to be clear that I am not, by nature, a person who does this. I am not a lurker, not a private investigator, not someone who follows people. I'm a CPA from Richmond, Virginia, who likes procedural crime dramas and grows herbs on her kitchen windowsill and has a standing Saturday morning yoga class that she sometimes skips without guilt. The version of me sitting in my car watching a building was a new version, freshly assembled from equal parts spreadsheet anomaly and marital unease. And she felt foreign inside my body. The building's management contact was Birchwood. The unit number I'd cross-referenced from the county tax records was 2B. I had no idea what I expected to see. Owen's car, maybe. Some version of a woman I'd conjured from the worst-case section of my imagination. A cliché. The thing people find when they trace mystery payments. What I saw instead was a woman coming out of the building's side entrance. She was carrying a reusable grocery bag in one hand, and had the other pressed flat against her lower back in the way that people carry weight they can't quite distribute. She was wearing a green winter coat that was, I registered this slowly, and then all at once, unbuttoned across the front because it could not close. She was very, very pregnant. I watched her walk to a small Toyota parked half a block up. She had dark hair pulled back, moved carefully, took her time. She got in. She pulled out. She drove away. I sat there. The thing about being a CPA is that your professional reflex is always to contextualize before you conclude. A pregnant woman leaving a building that may or may not be connected to my husband is not, by itself, a conclusion. It's a data point. I was trying very deliberately to hold it that way. I went home. I didn't tell Owen what I'd done. He asked how my Saturday was, and I said fine. I'd skipped yoga, and he said he'd gone to look at a parcel in Short Pump, and the zoning situation was a mess. We had pasta for dinner. He did the dishes. The normalcy of it had a quality I can only describe as excessive. The way silence in a house with thin walls seems louder because you're aware of what it's covering. I lay awake for a long time that night. Not because of what I'd seen, because of what I hadn't seen yet, and the particular hollow feeling of knowing there was more. Act 2. The story that almost worked Sunday morning. I asked Owen about Birchwood over coffee. Casual, or rather, calibrated to sound casual in the way that only people with something to find out can calibrate their questions. I was reconciling the joint account for taxes, I said. I kept seeing this payment to a property management company. Birchwood? I couldn't figure out what it was for. Owen looked up from his phone. No flinch. No microsecond of recalibration that I could see, and I was watching for it. He just nodded like I'd reminded him of something minor. Oh, yeah. That's the Franklin Street place, he said. I picked it up 2 years ago. Investment property. 1 bedroom. The management fees run through the joint account because of how I structured the LLC. I should have mentioned it. He said it with the tone of a man acknowledging a minor administrative oversight. Not guilt. Not anything I could grab onto. The rent isn't showing up as income, I said. It's going into the business account. I can send you the reconciliation. He was already looking back at his phone. Sorry, I know it's messy. I'll get you the paperwork. I nodded. I drank my coffee. The explanation was entirely plausible. Honestly, if you stripped away everything I'd felt sitting in my car on a Saturday morning watching a pregnant woman ease herself into a Toyota, it was almost boring. Investment property, management fee, administrative oversight. These things happen in households with complex finances. I have clients whose records are a disaster of exactly this kind. But the paperwork he sent me that afternoon was a lease agreement with a tenant name I didn't recognize, a Reyes, and a rent figure of $1,650 per month. The management fee of $1,450 was, as he'd explained, roughly 88% of the rent going to Birchwood, which was an unusually high rate for a management company, but not impossible for a hands-off investor who wanted zero involvement in tenant relations. I reviewed the document 3 times. I knew how to read a lease. Everything was formatted correctly. The signatures were in the right places. The date of execution was 18 months prior. So why did the back of my skull still have that low-grade alertness, like a dog whose ears won't go back down? I called Birchwood on Monday under the guise of being a prospective landlord. I asked about their management fee structure. Standard rate, the woman told me, was between 8 and 12% of monthly rent. I thanked her and hung up. 88% was not their standard rate. It was not anyone's standard rate. What that number meant, once I reframed it, was that Birchwood wasn't actually managing the property and keeping a percentage. They were receiving a fixed payment from Owen, $1,450 a month, and passing essentially all of it through to cover rent and utilities on a unit whose tenant was either paying extremely reduced rent or none at all. Owen wasn't receiving rental income. Owen was paying someone's rent. I sat with that in the converted sunroom while the dogwood tree swayed in a March wind that had no business being that cold. And I understood that the question was no longer what is this payment. The question was, who is A. Reyes? I'm a detail person. I always have been. In school, I was the kid who read the footnotes. In my professional life, this has made me very good at what I do, and occasionally insufferable at dinner parties. In my marriage, I had exercised what I believed was a healthy degree of restraint. I did not read Owen's messages. I did not track his location. I did not treat 7 years of relationship as something that required auditing. That restraint, in retrospect, is one of the things I mourn most. Not because it was stupid. It wasn't. It's what trust requires. But because it feels now like I was offered the answer repeatedly and declined to take it for the kindest possible reasons. I found Adriana Reyes Solis on Facebook on a Tuesday, exactly 1 week after I'd found the Birchwood payment. She had a private profile, but her profile picture was public. I stared at it for a long time. She had dark hair and an easy smile and was standing somewhere outdoors with mountains in the background. Somewhere southwest, I thought. The landscape too dry and wide for Virginia. She looked. I searched for the right word and could only find this one. Known. She looked like a person who'd been known by someone. I went back to Owen's paperwork, cross-referenced the lease address against everything in the county assessor's file. The property was registered to Moreau Holdings LLC, which was one of Owen's standard LLCs. I'd done the taxes on it before. I had never, and I want to be very specific about this, ever seen this property listed in the assets, which meant Owen had either registered it after our last filing, possible if recent, or had kept it out of the documents he gave me. I found the registration date in the assessor's database. 4 years ago. My husband had owned a 1-bedroom apartment in Richmond for 4 years and had told me about it 11 days ago when I asked directly. And what he'd told me was not wrong exactly. It just wasn't close to enough. I drove back to the building that Friday. I was there for 2 hours. At 11:43 in the morning, Owen's car turned onto the block. I watched him park. I watched him get out with 2 paper grocery bags, the kind from Elwood Thompson's where we also shop, the kind with the sturdy handles. I watched him use a key, his own key, not a building buzzer, to let himself into the side entrance. He did not look around before he went in. He didn't need to. He wasn't expecting anyone to be watching, because the person who would have been watching was home, working, maintaining the reasonable faith extension that their marriage ran on. He was in the building for 47 minutes. He came out alone, got in his car, drove away. I did not follow him. I sat in my own car for a long time after he left, with my hands in my lap and the engine off and the cold coming up through the floor mats. Richmond in March is not savage cold. It's the quiet, insidious kind. The kind that finds the gaps. I noticed, in a detached way, that I wasn't crying. I thought I would be. Instead, I felt something more like a recalibration, a slow, mechanical adjusting, the way a camera lens turns and turns and turns before the image clarifies. I drove home. I made dinner. When Owen came in at 7, I said, "How was your day?" And he said, "Long. The short pump project is stalling." We watched television. He fell asleep before 10. I started building a file. Thus, Act 3. The call. The file took me 3 weeks to build, because I was working from a position of legally and practically limited information, and because a significant part of me, the part that had been in this marriage for 6 years, that had learned his coffee order and his particular posture when he was tired, and the way his voice changed when he was talking to someone he genuinely liked, was simultaneously trying to find the exit ramp. The version of this story where there's a reasonable explanation, the version where a woman 7 months pregnant in an apartment my husband is quietly paying for, is, somehow, something other than what it looks like. I made a list of what I actually knew versus what I was inferring. I do this with clients whose records are ambiguous. It helps to separate the documented from the assumed. Documented. Monthly payment to Birchwood for 47 months. Property registered to Owens LLC for 4 years. Lease agreement showing tenant A. Reyes. Owen with key and groceries on a Friday morning. Woman approximately 7 to 8 months pregnant leaving the building on a Saturday. Inferred. Owen is in a relationship with the tenant. The pregnancy may involve Owen. Owen has been hiding this property and its occupant deliberately. Unknown. Who, specifically, is A. Reyes? Why this specific arrangement? Whether Owen is the father of the child. The unknown section was doing most of the damage. I am someone who can tolerate grief but not ambiguity. Tell me the worst thing. I will find a way through it. But give me a situation whose outline I can trace but whose interior I can't see. And something goes wrong in me. A specific, grinding anxiety that I have never found a clean way to manage. I had an appointment with Beth Chenoweth in the 3rd week of March. Beth is a family law attorney on West Broad Street. A practical woman in her early 40s with short, silver-streaked hair, and the kind of bluntness you either find alienating or deeply comforting. I find it comforting. I don't tell her everything. Not yet. I tell her I'm exploring my options in a marriage with complex finances, which is true. She tells me what I would need to document to protect myself in a separation scenario. I take notes in the same notebook I use for tax prep, which feels appropriate. Her rate is $2.50 an hour. I stay for 40 minutes. I leave with the name of a private investigator she uses and a general sense that I am building something rather than just catastrophizing. I don't hire the investigator yet. I still have one more inference I need to collapse into fact. On the 2nd Thursday of April, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. Richmond area code. I almost didn't answer. Tax season had turned my phone into a medium through which anxiety communicated with me directly, and an unknown number usually meant a client who'd lost my card. I answered. "Is this Claire Moreau?" The voice was careful, measuring something. "Yes," I said. A pause. "My name is Adriana Solis. I live at... I'm the tenant at the Franklin Street apartment." Another pause. "I think we need to talk." I sat down. I was in my office. The dogwood was in full bloom outside the window. I had a pen in my hand, which I put down slowly because my hand had started to shake, and I didn't want the noise of it to translate through the phone. "Okay," I said. "I've been trying to figure out how to..." She stopped, started again. "I found your name. In some documents Owen had in the apartment. He has a folder he keeps in the closet. I wasn't snooping. I needed a pen and I opened the wrong drawer." Her voice had a small fracture in it, the specific kind that comes when someone has been crying recently and has held it together long enough to make a phone call. "I found your marriage certificate." The dogwood tree bloomed outside. I watched a petal detach and drift. "How pregnant are you?" I asked. My voice sounded to me like someone reading from a document, flat and precise. 7.5 months. A breath. "Claire, I think we're married to the same man." Act 4. The architecture revealed. We met at a diner on Broad Street the following Saturday, a place called Millie's that neither of us suggested so much as stumbled into by agreeing to something neutral and accessible. I got there first. I chose a booth in the back where the light was dim and the nearest other table was empty. Because I am constitutionally incapable of having large feelings near strangers. Adriana came in 7 minutes after I arrived. I recognized her immediately, not just from the Facebook profile picture, but from watching her in the parking lot. The careful walk, the hand at her lower back. Up close, she was smaller than I'd expected, with the kind of face that is precise and pretty in a way that seems undecorated, like it doesn't require maintenance. She was wearing a gray sweater that stretched across her stomach. She slid into the booth across from me with some effort and set her phone face down on the table between us. We looked at each other for a moment. "You look how I expected," she said. "How's that?" "Organized." She said it without edge. "He has a type." A waitress came. We both ordered coffee, which in retrospect was not a thing either of us needed, and Adriana asked for water with it, and there was a small procedural interlude of napkins and cream and menus being set aside that I think we were both grateful for, because it gave us somewhere to put our hands and our eyes that wasn't each other's face. I opened my notebook. "I have questions," I said. "A lot of them. You can tell me what you want to tell me, and I won't push on what you don't." She looked at the notebook. "Are you going to write it all down?" "Yes," I said. "I process by documentation. I'm sorry if that's strange." "No." She shook her head. "It's fine. I think I need someone to document it. I've been the only one who knew for a long time, and it's too much to carry without it going somewhere." So she talked, and I wrote, and the diner hummed around us with the normal activity of Saturday mornings, other tables filling, the smell of eggs and coffee and the specific low-frequency noise of a room full of people for whom this is just a Saturday. And across from me, a woman I'd never met assembled a story that I recognized from the inside. Owen had met Adriana 9 years ago in Phoenix. She was working in hotel management. He was out there for a real estate conference, the kind he attends several times a year. They dated long distance for 8 months, which she described as intense in the way things are intense when geography creates urgency. He was attentive and specific, remembered what she said, followed up on things she'd mentioned in passing, called when he said he would. She used the phrase present in a way people usually aren't, and I wrote it down without letting my expression change. Because Owen had been present in a way people usually aren't with me too, at the beginning. They got married in a small ceremony in Phoenix, 2 years after they met. Her family, a cousin of his who'd flown out. No big production. He'd been thoughtful about it, chosen a restaurant she loved for the dinner after, gotten her a ring that was specific to her taste rather than generic. These were the kinds of details she offered that told me the most, because they were the same genre of detail I would have offered describing my own early marriage. "He told me his first wife died," she said. "Car accident. Before we met." She was looking at her coffee, not me. "He seemed not recovered from it exactly, like it had settled into him. I thought that was why he was careful with people, why he paid attention." I set down my pen. "He told me the same thing," I said. She looked up. "What?" "His first wife. Car accident. He told me she died 8 years ago." I watched the math move across her face, the dates recalibrating, the timeline reshaping. "We've been married for 6 years. He told me about her early on. Said her name was Dana," Adriana said. "Dana," I said. We stared at each other. In the silence, the diner carried on. A child at another table laughed at something. The sudden, uninhibited laugh of someone who hasn't yet learned to muffle joy. I noticed it because of how different it was from what was happening in our booth. "He had a nickname for you," I said. It wasn't a question. "Mi cielo." Her expression didn't change. He said it was a family expression his grandmother used. Owen had called me Mon ciel, the same phrase, French instead of Spanish. Same sky reference. Same grandmother. Same made-up inheritance repurposed and redeployed. My pen was still in my hand. I looked at what I'd written in the notebook. Then I turned it around and pushed it across the table so she could read it. She picked it up. I watched her read through the documentation of my investigation, the Birchwood payment, the cross-referenced property records, the timeline of visits I'd logged, the one entry from the stakeout where I'd noted 1043, subject enters with groceries, side entrance key in handwriting that was a little less steady than my usual. She put it down. She pressed both hands flat on the table, one on each side of the notebook, in a gesture that looked like she was trying to keep something from floating away. "He told me the Richmond apartment was temporary," she said. "He was supposed to be relocating. He said he had a business restructuring that needed to resolve before we could look at something permanent. I've been here," she looked up, 11 months. 47 payments to Birchwood. 47 months. She'd been here for 11. "Before Richmond?" I asked. "Charlottesville. For a year and a half. Before that, Phoenix, but that was I thought that was our home." She stopped. Her jaw tightened. "He was relocating me. One city at a time. Closer to him. I thought we were building towards something." I thought about Owen's explanation for his travel. Charlottesville. Roanoke. Occasionally D.C. The permitting timeline and the zoning variance, muttered under his breath like a man with legitimate concerns. He hadn't been traveling for work. He'd been visiting. I asked about the pregnancy. She told me it was unplanned, that Owen had seemed not unhappy, she said carefully, more like someone who needed to process. He'd been more attentive since she told him, not less. More groceries. More visits. More of the specific attentiveness that she'd mistaken, as she'd always mistaken, for love. "Is it his child?" I asked. "Yes." No hesitation. I wasn't seeing anyone else. I wasn't doing anything else. My whole world for 9 years has been reduced. She stopped, looked at the table. I didn't know I was being reduced. I thought I was being loved. The fluorescent light above us buzzed once, briefly. The child at the other table laughed again. Outside, through the diner's front windows, Richmond went about its Saturday. I called Beth Chenoweth on Monday. I told her everything, all of it. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've come to understand is a skill that most people don't have, and lawyers learn to deploy surgically. When I finished, she said, "Okay, here's what we need." What we needed, it turned out, was already most of what I had. In Virginia, bigamy is a Class 4 felony. Owen's marriage to Adriana preceded his marriage to me, which meant I was the second wife, which meant, legally, our marriage was the void one. This piece of information landed in me with a quality I can only compare to finding a typo in a document you've already submitted. The retroactive nausea of something being wrong that you cannot go back and fix, only acknowledge. Owen had also, Beth explained, almost certainly submitted fraudulent documentation to obtain our marriage license, certifying that he was unmarried at the time of our union. That's not civil, that's criminal. The property in Adriana's building, held under his LLC, would be subject to equitable claims from both of us, given the nature of his deception. It was, Beth said with a particular flatness that I recognized as professional calm over personal opinion, quite the situation. "He forged documents?" I asked. "Someone did. Let's establish who." She was already making notes. "Do you have the originals of everything you've described?" I sent her my file that afternoon. 46 pages of documentation, organized chronologically and cross-referenced, with a summary table at the front and source footnotes for every claim. She called me 2 hours later. Claire, she said, you should have been a lawyer. I don't have the temperament, I said. I need the numbers to stay where I put them. In this case, she said, they did. Adriana had her own attorney by then, a woman Beth referred. The two attorneys worked in parallel and occasionally in consultation, because there is a version of this situation where Adriana and I become adversaries. Competing claims, contested assets, the whole architecture of Owen's deception reassembling itself as a conflict between its victims. And both Beth and Adriana's attorney understood that this version served only Owen. So they worked carefully, and Adriana and I had 2 more conversations that I won't reproduce in full because they belong to her as much as to me, and some things should stay in the diner. What I'll tell you about those conversations is this. When 2 people have been told the same stories, in the same voice, and have believed them for overlapping years, and have organized significant portions of their interior lives around that belief, there is a specific kind of grief that activates in their presence that cannot activate anywhere else. Not anger. Not the clean fire of betrayal. Something older and quieter than that. The grief of realizing that a thing you thought was native to you, your particular dynamic, your specific rhythm, the way he knew what you needed before you said it, was a template. Something he kept in a drawer and applied as needed. The pet name was the worst of it, I think. Not the fake dead wife. Not the forged documents. Not the pregnancy. Not even the years and years of methodical lying. The pet name. Mi cielo. Mon ciel. The sky. He told each of us the same grandmother. He gave each of us the same sky. And we each carried it as something intimate and untransferable, a word that meant only us. And it was a word he'd said into 2 different faces in 2 different cities, and it meant, in the end, exactly nothing except that he knew how to find what people needed and knew how to hand it to them. Adriana's daughter was born in early May. I know this because she texted me from the hospital, a photo of a small face, the ordinary miraculous face of a newborn, entirely unaware of the circumstances of her arrival. She named her Luz. I looked at that photo for a long time. I texted back. She's beautiful. She has no idea how hard you worked to get here. I meant the literal labor. I also meant everything else. Act 5. The house at full weight. Owen was arrested in late April, 2 weeks before Luce was born. The charges were bigamy and documentation fraud. Beth told me later there was also an investigation into potential financial fraud related to the LLC structure he'd used to obscure the property payments. He was not. And I want to be fair about this because fairness is the only thing I have left that's entirely mine. The kind of man who committed any of this from cruelty. Beth asked me once if I thought he had ever genuinely cared about either of us, and I sat with the question for a long time before I answered. I think he had. I think Owen Moreau is a person who experienced real love and real attachment, plural, without having the interior infrastructure to make that mean something honest. There is a kind of person who creates these parallel worlds, not from pure malice, but from a fundamental inability to choose, who keeps building outward instead of going deep, who finds the next thing rather than sustaining the present one, and who gets so far into the architecture of their own construction that dismantling it becomes unthinkable because the whole structure would come down. Owen's deception was total, and it was long, and it caused enormous harm. I also believe it scared him. I believe sometimes driving between 2 cities, he felt the weight of what he'd built pressing down from all sides and understood, on some level, that there was no good exit, that he'd built himself into a corner he kept adding rooms to. This is not forgiveness. I want to be clear about that. Understanding the shape of something is not the same as releasing it. He pled guilty in August, after negotiations that I was told were largely shaped by the documentation Beth submitted on my behalf. He received a suspended sentence on the bigamy charge and 18 months on the fraud, partially suspended pending conditions. Our marriage was annulled, not divorced, annulled, because it had been void from the beginning, which is its own particular variety of legal and emotional uncanny. Adriana received a settlement from the jointly held LLCs as part of a civil proceeding. I received what I was entitled to from the marital assets, which Beth ensured was accounted for correctly, down to the last number. Owen's attorney, during the proceedings, made a brief statement on his behalf about remorse and complexity and the difficulty of certain life circumstances. I listened to it the way I listen to things now, with a new kind of attention that I didn't have before and don't especially want. The attention of someone who has been shown, concretely, how language can be deployed as misdirection. Every sentence Owen's attorney said was technically true. None of it was the whole truth. I recognized the architecture immediately. Once you've learned to see it, you can't unsee it. I went back to the house in the fall. We had owned it together, me and Owen, or the legal fiction of me and Owen, and it had gone through the annulment proceedings as a marital asset. I bought out Owen's share with the settlement funds, which Beth advised, and which made financial sense, and which I also did because I had spent 14 months in that house trying to figure out what was real, and I felt that the house owed me something. Or maybe I owed it. I'm still not sure which. October, the afternoon light in Richmond comes in at an angle that makes everything look like a Dutch painting. Specific, golden, honest in the way that painting is honest. All light and shadow in their correct proportions. I stood in the kitchen on an October afternoon, and I thought about what it means to inhabit a space that has been lived in partially. Every room we'd shared, every meal, every conversation, every ordinary Saturday with its ordinary debris of newspapers and coffee cups and to-do lists. All of it occurred in the presence of something I didn't know was there, the parallel structure, casting a shadow across everything, a shadow I couldn't see because I wasn't looking from the right angle. I have a therapist now, Dr. Pauline Garrett on Grove Avenue, who I see on Wednesdays. She is warm and precise in a way I find useful, and she has helped me understand, slowly, the way real understanding happens, that what I experienced is not, primarily, about Owen. What I experienced is about the discovery that truth has a texture you can't always perceive until something tears it, that you can live in faithful relationship to a reality that has been secretly doubled, and that the damage of that is not just what you lost. It's what you didn't get to build because the foundation was already compromised. She asks me sometimes what I miss. I tell her the truth, which is that I miss the version of the marriage I thought I had. Not the man, or not only the man, but the story. The coherent narrative of two people in a house in Richmond who knew each other completely and built something accordingly. That story existed in me fully formed, and I tended to it the way you tend to things that are yours. It was mine. It was also, it turns out, constructed from incomplete materials, and it cannot be salvaged in its original form. This is the most honest thing I can tell you about losing a marriage that was never real. You still grieve the version of it that was real to you. Adriana moved to a larger apartment in October, a 2-bedroom across the river in Manchester, which is where she wanted to be. She'd looked at it before Luce was born and then set it aside during the upheaval, and when everything settled, she went back to it. I know this because she texted me a photo of Luce in what appeared to be a very small sun hat, standing approximately 8 inches and listing to one side, in front of a window with excellent afternoon light. I have the photo on my phone. I have looked at it more times than I would report if someone asked. We are not, Adriana and I, friends. Exactly. The word doesn't quite fit. What we are is something that doesn't have a clean name yet, because it's new. Two people who were each handed a false version of the same map, who navigated the same territory from different directions, who arrived at the same revelation by different roads, who sat across from each other in a diner one Saturday and recognized something in each other that we hadn't expected to find, which is not the enemy, not the rival, not the other woman in the sensationalized version of this story. Just someone else who thought the sky was hers and learned what it meant when it wasn't. The house is quiet now in ways it wasn't before. Different quiet. Not the quiet of something hiding, but the quiet of something settling. I work in the sunroom most mornings. The dogwood has lost its leaves again. It will bloom again in April, stubbornly, pointedly, as it always does, whether I find it comforting or annoying. Some mornings I find it comforting. I am, in the practical and specific ways that matter, fine. I have my work, which has always been reliable precisely because it is honest. Numbers either balance or they don't. The discrepancy is either explained or it points at something that needs explaining. I have friends who knew me before Owen and knew me during and know me now. I have Wednesday appointments with Dr. Garrett and the slow work of rebuilding what you might call an epistemology of trust. Learning to extend good faith again without having to first prove to yourself that you've correctly identified all the possible failure modes. I am not, I should say, someone who is broken by this. I want to be clear about that. I am someone who was handed a large and disorienting piece of information about the nature of the world I thought I was living in, and I am processing it the way I process things, methodically, with documentation, with appropriate professional support, and with occasional late evenings when I sit in my kitchen and feel the weight of it without trying to manage it into something more bearable. Those evenings are allowed. They're part of it. But there is one thing I haven't been entirely able to file away, and I'll tell you about it because I think you should know. About 3 weeks after I moved back into the house on my own, I was getting ready for bed. Routine, brush teeth, face wash, the small liturgy of a person who lives alone and does not need to negotiate the bathroom schedule with anyone. I went to the closet to get a sweatshirt, and I opened it and I stood there. Owen's shirts were still on the left side. I hadn't dealt with them yet. 9 button-downs and 2 flannels and the pale blue one he'd been wearing the last time I'd seen him before the arrest, when he'd come to collect some things under the supervision of Beth's paralegal, who he'd treated with exquisite courtesy, because that's who Owen was. No matter how far the situation had gone, he retained the surface-level good manners of a man who had always understood that presentation mattered. The shirts hung there in the specific way of unworn clothing, slightly still, slightly there, slightly haunted in the way that objects belonging to someone who is no longer present are always slightly haunted. I looked at them for a moment. Then I closed the closet. Not because I couldn't deal with them. I'll deal with them. I know how to do the next task. Because I understood, standing there, that the shirts were the last version of the obvious thing. The thing you could see and point to. Owen is gone. These are his shirts. This is where the lie lived. Donate the shirts. Repaint the closet. Whatever you do next. That part is manageable. What isn't manageable, what I don't think ever entirely resolves, is what happens to the texture of ordinary things once you know. The coffee mugs we bought together. The weekend grocery runs that I now understand were sometimes not to our grocery store. The phone calls where he said I'm finishing up, I'll be home by 7, and was, and came in through the front door, and asked how my day was, and none of that was false. He was finishing up. He was home by 7. He asked about my day. He also, on some of those days, had been somewhere else before, had used a key that wasn't mine, had been present in a way people usually aren't to someone who thought the sky was hers. Every ordinary thing has a second shadow now. I can't always see it, but I know it's there. The way you know a word has a second meaning once you've learned it. You can never unhear it in the original sentence. This is what it means to have been given a parallel universe and mistaken it for a world. You get everything back eventually. You just get it back at a slight angle to where it was before, and you learn to live in the slant of it. And some mornings, in the light from the sunroom, you almost can't tell the difference. Almost. Some people don't cheat on you. They build a parallel universe and commute between them. They keep the utilities on in both places. They bring groceries to both kitchens. They give both women the same sky and believe, or need to believe, or have committed so fully to the architecture that they can no longer distinguish between belief and need, that the sky is big enough for this, that nobody will look up at the right moment and notice. I found my husband's second lease on a Tuesday in March, doing our taxes. The tenant was 7 months pregnant. She was not the mistress. She was the wife. I was the second one. The house is mine now. The dogwood will bloom in April. I opened the closet. His shirts. I closed it.